Okay, it's 8 o'clock. Good morning and welcome to the spring EDRR webinar. Montana Department of Ag, partnering with Dr. Joe Eichley from North Dakota State University. I'm just going to give a quick update on a few species that we all worry about and that we need to help each other find. And then Dr. Eichley is going to give a in-depth talk on Palmer amaranth and water hemp, two big fears for Montana. So if you have questions for me or Dr. Eichley, please put them in the Q&A. At the end of the talk, I'll answer questions to me myself, and then I'll ask questions for Dr. Eichley. If you have any for him, hopefully you do. Use the chat to just chat with each other. I'm not going to be monitoring to the chat. Nobody else will. So if you put questions in the chat, we're not going to see it. But do have your license number ready if you want credits, Montana credits. At some point, I'll ask you to type in your name and license number, and that will be in the chat. The first species I want to touch on quickly is common reed, or as you'll typically hear it called, Phragmites. Scientific name Phragmites australis, subspecies australis. It's a priority 1A in Montana, so it's the least abundant and the highest priority. We have a native, so you can see in that upper right-hand corner, the native is the smaller one with the yellow or gold seed head, and the invasive is that big giant one with the more coppery colored seed head. And that's a pretty good diagnostic feature, at least during the growing season, is the invasive has that coppery, brownish, purplish color. And it's also just huge and leafy, as you can see in the pictures. The bottom right-hand corner is the Great Salt Lake. They have 23,000 acres of it, I think, max at one point. Canada's got a lot of it. Idaho has it. So it's problematic all around us. The native that we have here in Montana, generally, you'll see other plants growing with it, and it's maybe only the height of a common human, not twice as tall. Oops. So in Montana, historically, we have had it in Hill and Blaine counties, so Havre and Chinook between the two along the High Line. We started out with 4 acres in 2015. In the last 10 years, we've got it down to about 0.2 acres. And then in 2023, we had in Gallatin County, and that was maybe just 1/10 of an acre. And with spraying it last year, right now we're just seeing occasional stems. So we did have this under control up until this winter. We started getting a lot of reports up in northwestern Montana. So we got one in Whitefish, right on a roadside in a ditch, one at Blanchard Lake, kind of out in the lake. New one at Big Fork, I think it's at the golf course. Haven't been to that one yet. And then one on Highway 2, right by Happy's Inn at Thompson Chain of Lakes. There's 18 lakes there, so that's a big concern. We're really close to Flathead Lake, lots of water up there. So we're certainly concerned. I visited all 3 of those sites, or 3 of the 4. I haven't visited Big Fork, but the other 3 have not yet got genetic testing. But from the plant material from last year, it looks like it's going to be positive. So this is bad news. So I hope all of you out there are looking for this one this summer, and this will be a big push for me throughout the year to try to see what we have going across the state. This is at Blanchard Lake. You can see I mentioned that twice as tall as an average human. So that's as tall as a kayak paddle. There is some grass growing in this on the edges, but in the middle, it's much more dense. It gets so dense that nothing else will grow with it. This was in May. It starts growing late, which is why we haven't done genetic testing yet, because there's been no fresh plant material, but by now there should be. This is May 19th of last year, actually, not this year. So this was this winter too. This is in by Happy's up on Highway 2, so between Kalispell and Libby. You can see that's about twice as tall as I am. I'm not a tall person, but that's very tall. This is, let's see how that's the same site there by Happy's. You can in October, very leafy and green. That's another diagnostic feature is by October, September, the native is going to be senesced and the invasive will still be looking really green and ready to go. Then you can see again that coppery colored seed head. This is the whitefish site. As soon as I saw these pictures, I was certain that it was the invasive, uniquely bright. That one's extremely red, but yeah, that reddish purple color, copper color. We'll again soon be getting that genetically tested. And then another one I think we all need to be looking out for, but I'm really aiming this at southern Montana along the Wyoming border, specifically south of Billings. But I'd be worried any of those counties along that area. Medusa head. This is a annual grass similar to cheatgrass or ventonata, but unlike cheatgrass and ventonata, we really don't have much in Montana yet, and we don't want more. So right now we have just a we have like an acre and a half up near Libby, but it's under control, so just a few plants. Then we have a little bit more on the CSKT, and that's also been under control and monitored. But the big concern is Wyoming's got it. So if you're one of these southern counties, keep an eye on it. And if you think you have it, we'll come out and look this summer. I'm gonna get on some private land for sure this summer and check it out down there. It's been kind of an issue getting permission to get access, but we're gonna finally do it this year. The rush skeleton weed, this is one I always think about. Keeps me up at night. We have 5 grants in Montana now, so all these western counties are covered. Either they have a grant with a strike team and a task force lead, or else they are being helped by a grant adjacent to. The big news on rush skeleton weed is we thought we had very little in Mineral County and in Missoula County up until this past summer. We've suddenly realized we've got it everywhere, all the way to the Granite County border. So Missoula County has a new grant, and they're going to be working across those 3 counties, treating and surveying. And then the Lewis and Clark County site, which is less than 2 years old, which was a big concern to us being so close to the Golden Triangle. Last year, they both looked good. Well, this year, the site on the west side of Helena has over 430 plants. So that's really bad news because Lincoln County, which is one of the main counties, only has 1,500 plants roughly in the entire county. So to find out one site has 430 plants, that's bad. But the good thing is they're all in one site, so it's not like they're spread out everywhere. So it'll be treatable. And then the East Helena site, I was out there Friday, found 2 plants, not bad at all. These pictures are really diagnostic of it. You can see it's got the stiff hairs at the base of the hem, the stem, the rosette looks just like a dandelion. And then the leaves up on the stems are just very slim to non-existent. And then the one plant I found some creature had chewed off the stem, and you can see those hairs are just bright red. Usually they say the stems are reddish brown. I don't think it's normally very noticeable, but that one, boy, that was bright red. So if you see something that looks like a dandelion and on the upper half is just a lot of stems with not much leaves and it has hairs on the bottom, let me know. Dyer's Wood, great news. Amber Birch and Working Ducks for Conservation and all the partners just continue to do great on this one. We only had 140 plants in the entire state last year after having hundreds of thousands of plants across the state in the 1980s and historically 21 counties with it. This is just the big Montana success story, and every year it gets better and better. I think maybe with the addition of indaziflam, since the biennial only that reproduces by seed, we might someday actually eradicate this. Scotch broom, only far northwestern Montana, Sanders and Lincoln counties. We started to prioritize this quite a bit the last 2 years. MDT is making it a big priority because a lot of it's right on Highway 200. It's a pea. It's a shrub. It's got green stems with edges on it. It likes wet areas, so it's probably not going to grow anywhere outside of the Idaho-Montana border. But the exciting news on this is that we're thinking about trying to move it up to a 1A from a 1B. So means it's pretty uncommon in Montana, and that's awesome. Maybe because that not much of Montana is suitable for it. Now, Tansy ragwort, we know lots of Montana is suitable for it. Basically, any forested area, really likes logged areas, grazed areas, grows in the open forests. We're going to try to move that up to a 1B because specifically Lincoln County has been doing such great work on this one on their task force with the timber companies too. So that's exciting. And if you have any comments on these, let us know. We had a meeting about it last week to discuss furthering that effort, and we're going through with it. So Dr. Eckley is going to talk about water hemp and palm amaranth. We've had 2 detections of water hemp in Montana, Roosevelt County and Prairie County. It's been a few years. We took care of those right away. Montana's a big state, so I hope it's actually being found. It's sparsely populated out there. Palmer amaranth, we've had 3 sightings so far. The first was in Shelby, which was kind of a surprise because we thought it would come from North Dakota, but the Shelby site was birdseed, 1 plant. The latest one was 1 plant down in Carter County on the side of the road. So we've never had seed happen. We want to keep this up. We're basically the last standing state in the lower 48. And I think Dr. Eckley will tell you a lot of things that are going to scare everybody about this if you haven't already been scared by it. So if you do see one of these after we go through everything that's going to be heard here, leave it standing. I think that's still our best management practice, to leave it standing so it's easier to identify. ASAP, reach out to your county coordinator or your county extension agent or me. Text us pictures, email us pictures, whatever. Get us out there. Has an accelerated growth rate, so we want to make sure we see it right away. But we do kind of want to leave it in the field so it doesn't start wilting, because I don't think any of us are great at identifying it in Montana. GPS it, pictures. We'll send it to the Scudder lab. We'll get genetic testing because it looks similar to a lot of other pigweeds in Montana. And then we'll find out the source. We'll make an action plan, and we'll make sure that we don't get any seeding for at least 3 years. Our state expert is Tim Seipel at MSU. You probably know that. If we have questions about him or about these plants, we can ask him. He's sort of the same person here in Montana as Dr. Eckley is for North Dakota. So we have strong resources if we need them. Reach out to me with any questions. You can just Google MT EDRR or reach out to me anytime about anything. You guys all know I love weeds. And I'm going to go ahead and introduce Dr. Eckley now. And unfortunately, I forgot to print out his bio. But that, if you want to read it, I did send it out in the email. So Dr. Eckley, I kind of learned about him, because he's doing really great work in our neighboring states. So same type of weeds we're dealing with. And so he works for North Dakota State University. And I put up that logo so none of us have nightmares from the actual bison logo if we're cat or grizz fans. But he's also has a podcast called War Against Weeds that's just excellent. So I've learned a lot just from listening to his podcast and from looking at his research online. And I really admire his work. And then I've never actually met him in person, but you can tell if you listen to him that he's the kind of person that would just fit in perfectly in Montana and that you'd like to spend time with. So I'm glad that he's a colleague of ours and that we get to benefit from his knowledge. And I am going to now turn it over to him. Go ahead, Joe.
All right. Thank you for the introduction. Seeing you may have to stop sharing. I don't know if I can override.
Okay.
All right. All right. You should be seeing a scary looking field there. All right. Well, again, thank you, Josh, for the introduction. Figured what I would do is I want to just kind of give the North Dakota experience with both of these weeds, water hemp and palmer amaranth. And so these are two pigweeds. If you do any reading or browsing of trade magazines or on the internet of anything to do with croplands, you've heard of these two because these are definitely the two worst pigweeds, very prevalent in the core growing areas of the country for corn, soybean. Palmer amaranth, more of an issue in the cotton areas in the southern U.S., but both of them are very similar and both can be very problematic. And I kind of want to walk you through some of our experiences here in North Dakota to really reemphasize why you don't want these to get a foothold, particularly in crop production. Can these be an issue outside of crop production areas? Anywhere where there's kind of a hole where there's not plants growing, they can get established. But generally, native vegetation will kind of outcompete these, and they are summer annual weeds. So not saying they won't ever be a problem in pasture or rangeland, because they can certainly find their niche, but so far they've mainly been cropland problems. So any good weed scientist likes to take pictures of big weeds. Josh certainly had a few that he started his presentation with. And you've seen tall palmer amaranth and water hemp from other areas of the country. Here's some grown here within 100 miles of my office. So palmer amaranth about 80 miles west of my office in Fargo. Again, this was grown in a cornfield. Here's water hemp about 15 miles east of where I'm sitting. And so you can see, I think that was a 1500 Chevy behind that water hemp. So taller than that truck and wider than the front. So one of the reasons these weeds are very problematic is because they can be quite prolific seed producers. You might often hear the term 1 million seed per plant thrown around. Not every plant will have 1 million seed. We did not count this water hemp, but this is the type of plant you need to get up to that 1 million seed per plant type of threshold. And that can happen in a lot of areas in a crop field in a given year. This is the other side of the story that I like to tell a lot of our growers, and I should probably hide these floating controls because I don't know if people can see the top of my screen, but I sure can't. There we go. So one thing that we always kind of hoped and dreamed is that water hemp and palmer amaranth tend to emerge later in the spring, mid-May to late May. I'll get into a little bit more detail on that. So if we have a good spring wheat crop established, we would hope that would kind of take care of everything. A lot of these fields do go into rotation with corn and soybean where these weeds can be a problem. And what we can see, we do now have water hemp that emerges the same time as wheat. And so it's becoming a growing issue in wheat for us. But I often like to show that after wheat harvest, we might have, depending on the year, 1, 2, 3 months until we get a good killing frost. And we've seen this. This is a picture from 2020 after wheat harvest. Tracked these plants that germinated about the last week of August with the rainfall event. And this picture here was taken middle part of September. So this is one of hundreds of thousands of water hemp in this particular acre of this field I was tracking. Got to about 3 inches tall. Did go ahead and thresh this female plant. And on the right here, you can see some black seed, brown seed, and then here I'm circling a white seed as well. That's immature, but usually these will go on to mature as well. Counted 88 seed out of this plant. So we talk about 1 million seed per plant, and that's a nice big number to throw around. But if you have a wheat field that you harvest, walk away from, and then have hundreds of thousands of plants come up and produce 100 seed per plant, it still comes down to a numbers game. And so this is one of the reasons why these are problematic, just very prolific seed producers, whether they're the big ones that we like to show off in pictures or these small ones that can come up later in the year. So water hemp, I actually don't want to spend a whole lot of time on because I really want to present kind of some case studies and more built around palmer amaranth because that tends to get most of the news. I'll just basically say water hemp is one of our worst weeds in cropland at this point. So I thought I'd go back in history and see, when did this start becoming a problem to maybe give you a snapshot of how quickly or slowly a problem can develop. My predecessor, Dr. Rich Zollinger, would do a weed survey. The last one was in 2000. Basically go around in the spring and in the summer, documenting all the weeds present in different fields within each county and different cropping systems across the state of North Dakota. In the 2000 survey, in the springtime, 4 counties detected water hemp. These are Cass, so I'll say Cass, Richland, and Trail are these 3 along the Red River. Nelson, this is near Devil's Lake, so generally wetter areas of the state. Anywhere from 1 to 3.3% of the fields, water hemp was detected in the spring. How problematic? If you look at the list of weeds detected in that county, for instance, Cass County, 30 weeds were reported in the survey. Water hemp was the 24th most prevalent. So can we find them? Yes, in a few fields, but overall pretty low on the ranking. Coming back that summer, these 4 counties, no water hemp was reported. So to me, that it basically indicates typical control measures in that crop field took care of water hemp. Up in Rolette County, this is up near the Canadian border, still kind of the eastern half of our state. All of a sudden, 12% of the field surveyed did have water hemp in the summer. A little bit further north, so maybe these germinated later. Maybe we did a little bit of weed ID throughout the training season. But that's the 5 counties in 2000 where water hemp was reported. If I want to look at it statewide, in the spring survey, 0.3% of all fields. In the summer, 0.2%. To put it in context, just grouping all the pigweed species together, things like redroot pigweed, smooth pigweed, tumble pigweed, pal amaranth, both survey dates about 25%. So maybe some of these were water hemp that was a misdiagnosis, because all the pigweeds do tend to look pretty similar. But here's certainly the data set that we're working with. Now, maybe you've got a little preview here, wondering why a lot of these counties are green. If we fast forward to 2005, here's all the green counties where we have detected water hemp. So any county in green, we found at least 1 population. So good news, I guess, for everyone over there in Montana, but I will say that Roosevelt infestation would be right about here. And I'll point that out again when we get to some Palmer amaranth maps. Now, when I discuss water hemp, if a county is in green, that's where I bring in the other part that we talk about with water hemp and Palmer, is herbicide resistance. So these weeds are also very on the bad list. Words aren't coming to me this morning too well, but because they have a lot of herbicide resistance. So if you look at broadleaf plants in the world, Palmer is number 1, water hemp is number 2 as far as sites of action of herbicide resistance within broadleaf weeds across the world. What basically is guaranteed with water hemp is we have resistance to glyphosate and to our group 2 herbicides, the ALS inhibitors. So a county in green, I'm saying you've got at least those 2 resistances. If I want to kind of narrow in a little bit more where water hemp is very problematic, Fargo is about here in Cass County. If I draw a line over to about Jamestown, middle of this county, and south, that southeast corner of the state, if I were to overgeneralize, water hemp is the worst weed in crop production. It's certainly getting more prevalent going up the Red River. Some of these areas, it's going to be the worst weed in some fields, but this southeast corner is where we kind of really live and breathe water hemp. So go back 25 years ago, found in about 5 counties. Now it's basically the number 1 weed for many farmers in this area of the state. The thing that's becoming a bit more problematic for us is we stack on more herbicide resistance. The group 14 herbicides, PPO inhibitors, things like sulfentrazone, the Spartan products. We're now starting to see populations pop up in several counties, again, primarily in what I would call the more traditional water hemp areas of the state. But we're seeing more and more populations now with resistance to 3 different sites of action. And then we have found dicamba-resistant water hemp. This is just north of me, and Trail County is the county north of Fargo. We have found dicamba resistance there. For anyone using the Extend soybean system, which I know there's not a lot of soybeans in Montana, but I know there are some. And when we had the dicamba label to use an Extend soybean, this half-pound rate of dicamba per acre is at 1x use rate. Here's that resistant population on the top, and here's our susceptible check on the bottom. And just showing that we can also have plants survive and produce seed at a 4x rate. So we now have a fourth site of action. 2,4-D is still working for us on this population, but now we do have some group 4 resistance. So that's what we found to date. If I go south to South Dakota and east to Montana, we can stack on things like atrazine resistance and some of our group 27 herbicides that we use a lot in corn, but also in small grains and products like Husky. We have group 27 component. There is resistance to that in our neighboring states, but not to North Dakota yet. So that's really what I wanted to cover on water hemp, just kind of highlighting it's from 25 years ago, kind of a novelty almost, to now it's a very big problem for us, and continuing to expand its geographic footprint and the number of sites of action of herbicide resistance that we were dealing with. Now, Palmer amaranth is a lot newer for us, and so I figured it would be nice to just kind of walk through the history of how we know it for Palmer within North Dakota, and really give some case studies here, because since first detections were in 2018 and our Department of Ag almost immediately added it to the noxious weed list, it has greatly helped us in tracking infestations across the state. So I think we can tell a pretty neat story here. So I could not find the 2018 map, but the North Dakota Department of Ag has been the curator of the Palmer amaranth map. So I've got the 2019 map. The end of 2019, we had 9 counties. The blue counties were all 2018. So 2018 was the first year we found Palmer, and then we found it in a total of 5 counties, basically in the August through October timeframe, from first detection to kind of ringing the bell and, hey, let's keep a lookout for this. And these were various methods of introduction. We think some of them were contaminated cattle feed. Some was probably a contaminated combine. I know this one up near Devil's Lake happened to be along a railroad track where they took rail cars off and kind of cleaned them out. So some Palmer amaranth seed riding around in some trains. And in 2019, we had a cluster down in these counties. I'll describe a little bit more of what was going on as I get into some of our more case studies. But for a mapping purpose, and all of a sudden we had this cluster show up in 2019. Total of 9 counties. At the end of 2020, we were up to 13 counties. And so now with how the Department of Ag was tracking it, the colors will change throughout the years on these maps. But now it's just a different color at different years. So 13 counties in total, but 2 of these counties had additional infestations pop up. So findings in 2018 and findings in 2020. By 21, we were up to 14 counties. Again, colors on the maps changed a little bit. We're starting to get a feel that we were doing a better job tracking and going back to some of these sites and seeing if we could find repeat plants. I know Josh had mentioned if you find water hemp in Palmer, Montana, we want to detect it for 3 years. Very similar management system that we had. So now these blue counties, we could go back and no longer find Palmer amaranth at these sites where they were detected. So these were very low-level infestations found kind of early and could not find repeat plants. Green counties were now previously detected, but we could go back and find plants still. And the red counties were the new counties in 2021. By the end of 2022, we were up to 19 counties. So again, 3 colors on the map. The blue is still the color representing that we used to find plants there, but in the summer of 2022, could not find additional plants of these infestations. Green is still that we found plants and they were still present in summer of 2022. Red were new detections in 2022, but they were basically 1 to 5 plants that were found at these sites. And they were hand pulled and no more plants were found. So again, I think this was Roosevelt County here. So did find 1 Palmer amaranth plant along the border. I believe it was in the field of a cover crop mix, indicating possible cover crop seed contamination. But 4 additional counties in 2022, just a handful of plants, and they were all hand pulled. Now this is the last map that I have, because in 2023 and 2024, we have not found additional infestations. So I'm going to count this as a good thing. There's probably a few more that popped up along the way, maybe went unreported, but as far as our reporting system, nothing new since the end of 2022. So when I kind of take a look at this, if I add the red and the blue counties up, basically over half the counties we've found Palmer amaranth in, or about half. Low-level infestations, because it was on the noxious list, we found them. We're able to get rid of the populations and cannot find additional plants. The green counties, there's a mixture of what's going on, and I'm going to present one case study from Barnes County to kind of show a worst case situation. But on the whole, when we look across the state, I think we're doing a good job, and I attribute that to the fact that we added it to the noxious list almost immediately and had a mechanism to go in and remove plants early on in the infestations. That early detection, rapid response type of action. The other thing I just highlight, because this has been pretty neat tool for us. Also, by the end of 2022, we did work with our soybean council to get a couple of 3D printed Palmer amaranths commissioned. So these were not cheap, and we were the prototype, but they're always fun to bring around to trade shows. Look pretty realistic, 7 feet tall, and they're certainly a great way to grab someone's attention and bring them into the booth. And so I will say one is housed here in Fargo. We keep the, how did we do it? We keep the male plant in Fargo, and the female plant is out in Minot. So we even keep our plastic printed plants separated so they don't potentially breed, because I've seen Jurassic Park and know that things can happen. So going back to the map here, I'm going to present 2 case studies. The first study is going to be a relatively quick one, and then the rest of the presentation I'm going to park on one population here in Barnes County. But south central part of the state, Emmons County. So this is a county still has a decent amount of cattle for us. Pretty big sunflower growing county, but also has a lot of wet fields. And so oftentimes we might be wet throughout May, throughout June. What's something we can throw in the ground late June, early July, and that's millet. And by the early part of September, can have a really good forage crop. And so this was, I forget the year, 2020, I believe it was. A lot of millet went in, and we got called out to some fields. So this is a German millet or foxtail millet field, and very hard to see from the road. But once we got into the field, this is all about chest-high millet. We could see some Palmer amaranth plants sticking up above the canopy here. And so this particular field was interesting because we walked the whole field with the farmer, and we found about 80 plants on a 40-acre field. So about 2 plants per acre. And you know, always have to be careful. I'm on the education side, not regulatory. So I mean, we suspect with foxtail millets, there's often a high risk of contamination within seed lots. Could not find any Palmer amaranth in seed lots, but I always like to point out that this millet field, it was planted at 20 pounds per acre. And so if it was contamination, and we have basically 2 plants per acre, 2 Palmer amaranth seed and 20 pounds of millet seed is certainly going to be difficult to find for the regulatory process. But this is what we were seeing in some millet fields that year. So we went through, basically hand weeded all these plants, and we have not found additional infestations on any of these millet fields from 2020. But what we did is we brought it into the greenhouse, just basically threshed the females to get seed off, planted them in flats. And this is the other thing I should point out with water hemp and Palmer. When you get an infestation, what we see here in the greenhouse, we often see in the field, where we have different germination timings. Basically, anytime the environment is right and there's a shot of water. So you might see a little 2-leaf Palmer amaranth hiding down here under the canopy of what was probably a 10-inch tall plant. But certainly a lot of Palmer amaranth growing out of those plants, even though they were probably only grown for about 2 months, but plenty of viable seed. Then we sprayed that flat with 10 pounds of glyphosate per acre, and I would have done a better job taking that 2.5-gallon jug and just putting it on the flat, because we did have survivors. So basically a quick initial look that we do have not just glyphosate resistance, but very high levels surviving 10 pounds per acre of glyphosate. And there was not a whole lot of seed to work with, but that's essentially one snapshot of 2020. Now, where I want to park for basically the rest of the presentation is this case study in Barnes County. So this one, I'm just going to walk you through how we went to the field this day to basically look at some plants. And then I had some greenhouse research that winter, and I had about 3 or 4 years of summer research at this site. So kind of wanted to show just how that evolved throughout the years. So got called to the site, and agronomists thought that they found Palmer amaranth. Certainly seemed more aggressive than the water hemp that they were used to dealing with. Immediately pull up to the site, and in the compacted gravel entryway to the field, 2 weed species present: kochia and then Palmer amaranth. And this area of the state does have some its fair share of kochia issues, but then you can see Palmer amaranth in this compacted gravelly area surviving just fine going to seed. One thing with Palmer we always talk about for identifying characteristic is a tall seed head. So basically on a plant that was about a foot tall, we still had another 5 inches of seed head on top of that vegetative tissue. So that's something we certainly see with Palmer a lot, even if they're small plants. Then you get into the field, so 100 yards away from those small compacted plants. Cornfield, a couple things I'll point out, some precursors. There's some volunteer sunflower. Oddly enough, velvet leaf. That's not a weed we deal with a lot, but is prevalent in other states. And a lot of our infestations that I'll be talking about, where we find Palmer, we find velvet leaf. So just one of the sources of infestation just happens to be one of these weird things that we're finding. But anyways, back to the 100 yards from small compacted foot tall plants. I believe this one was 12 foot and this one was 13 foot. And these were laid on top of a manure pile on the edge of the field. This is a typical thing that we might see with Palmer in a cornfield is 12 foot tall corn, but then you kind of look at first, it just seems like another tassel, but you've got a big tall Palmer amaranth overtopping the corn. What's not often seen from the road is all the stuff that's about chest high. So walking to the field, and then this field was just loaded with Palmer amaranth within the corn rows. So we often talk about corn as a good tool or a good crop for controlling water hemp or Palmer. And we do have plenty of options in corn, but if we have escapes, we're often not able to see them as well. So we can often see a lot of plants hiding within cornfields. These are about chest high. Here's plants that were only about knee high within that field, but still enough sunlight filtering through where these plants can survive and go to seed. And that becomes certainly an issue for next year's crop. And rotation going to be a crop that we don't have as many herbicide options for. So then I climbed on top of the manure pile that we were laying these plants on. And here's the corn. So a lot of those pictures were taken right in here. Planted, this is sometimes farmed as one big field. This year is split into 2. Corn on the left, soybean on the right. This was the Monday after Labor Day. So basically the second week of September. The beans were already turning color, so that's why the rest of the field is brown. Where it's not brown, that was all just a lot of Palmer amaranth. And then again, you just can't see it hiding in the corn part of the field there. So then we just kind of said, well, why don't you go ahead and show us around the operation? So this is a cattle operation that does enough corn and soybean on the side to have vested interest in crops. Here's a manure pile. Plenty of mature Palmer amaranth seed growing out of the top of that pile. Again, second week of September, you kind of go digging around the pile, and you might see this is about a 3 or 4 inch tall plant. End of the year, so they know that frost is coming and it's putting on a seed head. So this plant certainly would have gone on to produce seed. Then talking to the farmer, he kind of mentioned he was getting some sunflower screenings for the past couple years for supplemental cattle feed. Mentioned he just got a delivery in last week, so we went over to look at the pile of sunflower screenings. And certainly what most of you can see, plenty of sunflower hulls there. Certainly we have some volunteer sunflower, so had some full ones coming through. But unless you're looking closely, you may miss the middle part of the screen here. Pigweed cotyledon. And so I will say at this stage, someone like me with plenty of experience, all I can tell you is that's not water hemp. It could be 5 other pigweeds, but we did genetically test these cotyledons, and this was indeed a Palmer amaranth coming directly out of the feed pile delivered a week earlier. So didn't test directly off the truck, but can certainly say very high likelihood of Palmer amaranth contamination from this feed source. So then what I decided to do is we took basically 2 Menards bags full of pure screenings back to campus with us, just to kind of do a little research, kind of play around with what's going on here. And so we went ahead and counted out 10 different lots of a 1/4 pound of these screenings. So pure screenings is what we're working with at this point. So 10 lots of a 1/4 pound. We planted that directly into the greenhouse. So plenty of volunteer sunflower. There's some other stuff coming up too. But we went ahead and counted all the pigweeds, and we were basically finding 200 to almost 400 per that 100 gram or per that 1/4 pound. So extrapolate that out, it's about 1,000 to 1,700 pigweed seed per pound of feed, and you're getting whatever 17 ton at a time being delivered. So you can kind of do some quick math and see how hot a load might be for some contamination here. On average, about 1,300 per pound. Now, we did go through and kind of start to separate these out some as they were grown in the greenhouse, let them get big enough for proper identification. Over 90% were Palmer amaranth. The other ones that we found, redroot pigweed and a pretty good contamination of tumble pigweed, which where sunflowers are grown, tumble pigweed can be an issue, so that was not too surprising, but maybe another diagnosis that likely from that sunflower contamination. Here's just showing what a flat looks like. So this is one of these 1/4 pound lots. We've removed all the volunteer sunflower. We did leave in, this is volunteer foxtail, or some of it was volunteer foxtail, some was volunteer millet, and some was volunteer sorghum. So a couple of different grasses in there, but predominantly pigweeds. And then if I lost it on the screen, there is a velvet leaf or 2 hiding in here for those with a sharp eye. So kind of the same species kept popping up for some of these. There's my velvet leaf for some of these contaminated screenings. So then, okay, we basically found these pure screenings we pulled directly off of the pile just to see what's in there. Now, what about what herbicide resistance is coming in with these screenings? Again, dropped off just the previous week at this operation. So we went ahead and we tested 112 just individual Palmer plants, treated with a little bit over a pound of glyphosate per acre. We basically, before treating, we did take 1 leaf per plant, send it off for genetic testing to determine what mechanism of resistance may be present. So out of 112 plants, 41% survived glyphosate application. So basically about 40% of the plants were coming in with glyphosate resistance. Of those, 89% had the test of overexpression of EPSPS that confers glyphosate resistance. So about 90%, 9 out of 10 of the 40%, had a mechanism that we could test for, indicating the other 11% may have a different mechanism of resistance. So 4 out of 10 plants resistant to glyphosate, looks like 2 different mechanisms at play. Just for what this looked like, a wide range of symptomology from 0 symptoms to completely dead to kind of beat up, but left out in the environment without crop competition would go on to produce seed. Then we tested the group 2 herbicides because, as I kind of mentioned back with water hemp, glyphosate and the group 2 herbicides come standard within a population, and we suspected the same, but we're basically confirming. So same thing, 112 plants. We used 1 rate of a Mazamox. So this is Raptor or Beyond Extra. Probably, I know you get some use out of that in some of the crops in Montana as well. 80% survival, with basically 75% of those survivors, basically no symptoms at all. So pretty high level of resistance to the group 2 herbicides. And again, here's just a picture of what that looks like. So the standard 2 that we assume, glyphosate and group 2 resistance, coming in with these screenings. So then we decided we need to expand this out to some of our other popular herbicides that we also know there's reported cases of resistance within Palmer amaranth. So went to a little bit more of a thorough resistance screening here. Always applied to 3-inch tall Palmer in the greenhouse, some of our typical research practices. Glyphosate and then the Mazamox, again, we just wanted to repeat those two herbicides in this screen. Famecifin, which is Flexstar or Reflex, if you can use this in Montana, it's probably very limited areas, but a Group 14 herbicide, easy way to test for resistance in a foliar screen. Atrazine we use a lot in corn, and then dicamba and 2,4-D, of course, we use those in many areas of the state, and associated rates in that middle column. We applied all those at a 1 and a 3x rate. And what I'm just showing here is the percent of plants that survived. And this is out of 10 across 2 runs. So basically I have 20 plants percent survival. But glyphosate, that 1x rate, 55%. That 3x rated glyphosate, we had 10% plants survive, a 77%, and a Mazamox. Group 14, we had 1 plant survive the 1x rate. But overall, this population did not appear to be Group 14 resistant. And we did this several times, and basically we did not import Group 14 resistance on this population. Atrazine was a little surprising to me. I wasn't expecting to have atrazine resistance come in, but we had plenty of survivors. And then dicamba and 2,4-D, the number of survivors kind of depended on the rate. And so again, I was looking at half-pound rates, maybe more applicable to cropping system. The 3x rate would be 1.5 pounds, maybe what you might be used to using in pasture and rangeland, maybe on the lower end of that scale for some, but plants surviving that rate. Again, pictures just for fun. Here's Raptor or Mazamox, basically just showing no symptomology on some of the survivors. Here's a half-pound rated dicamba. You kind of get that growth regulator symptomology, but the growing point is basically just fine and starting to regrow. Half-pound of 2,4-D, almost like it just added leaves to it. So that was almost like fertilizer for that one. So then we wanted to go on to a few additional sites of action. So again, I was very surprised by the atrazine, how many plants survived atrazine. And just knowing in the literature, more so with water hemp, usually when you can see some atrazine resistance, you might see some Group 27s. So again, these are corn products, mesotrione and timbotrione, but if you use things like husky and small grains, that would be a Group 27. Testing for glufosinate, we use a lot of this post-emergence in our crops, and then I wanted to go with the higher rate of 2,4-D, the rate that we actually use in our Enlist soybean system. So again, basically the same setup here, same kind of 50% survival from atrazine. We were getting survival of mesotrione, one of our Group 27s, but timbotrione, we did not get any survivors, so a different Group 27. 2,4-D still had survivors, and again, we repeated this glufosinate several times, but we did not import glufosinate resistance. So that was certainly some good news for us in our cropping systems. But more pictures. Here's 1.5 pounds of atrazine. I point this out because where we grow corn, we're more on the half pound or less use rate. You can go up to 2 pounds in other areas of the country further south. So basically, we're already having resistance to rates higher than we use on this population we imported. Just a few more atrazine pictures. Our half-pound rate that we might use, 3 times that. Group 27, here's mesotrione survivors, just kind of the symptomology. Group 27 is a bleaching herbicide, so you would expect white symptoms before death. Some white symptoms that kind of grew out of it almost immediately. And then just kind of a range of survivors. So, and 2,4-D again. So basically some of the conclusions from this greenhouse research. We basically, and this, again, we pulled this directly out of this feed pile delivered a week earlier, and we found resistance to 5 different sites of action. Additional research that did not quite show, but we did find that we had metabolic or non-target site resistance as well. So this is, I first became suspicious because of the atrazine, but a lot of the for some of the populations in the literature, if you have non-target site or metabolic resistance within a pigweed like palmer, you might get atrazine, 2,4-D, and mesotrione, all because of this metabolic resistance. And this appeared to be what we had. We did confirm target site resistance for glyphosate and group 2 herbicides. And again, I just kind of point out plenty of susceptible individuals within the population, but we talk about this on a population scale. And the other interesting thing for me is usually we say a field is a population, and yeah, that would be the same thing for this field or this operation. But if you're getting 10 to 20 semi-loads per year over 3 years, and knowing the level of infestation within each one, and not knowing where these screenings are coming from, we could have the entire genetic population of the Great Plains in this field. So it's just kind of an interesting thing to think about, where we don't know the origin of some of these screenings, but basically that they're coming from sunflower growing areas of the U.S. So wanted to shift gears and show what we were able to do in the field. So kind of a more aggressive programs approach. This will be primarily corn and soybean. Did some other crops that we don't have enough or as much research on. But again, just kind of showing what happened with this situation. So going back to the same site, one thing we always noticed. So I did not mention this earlier with water hemp. For us, we've kind of said May 15 is our average first date of water hemp emergence. 2 out of the past 4 years, it's been about May 1st. So water hemp early to mid-May is when we see germination along the I-94 corridor for water hemp. Palmer, it seems like it's always been about June 1. So we've tracked this site now for 5 years, and we have not found emergence before Memorial Day. So Palmer about June 1 gets started a little bit later along the I-94 corridor. 2 different site years I'll be presenting. 2021 was our severe drought year. So limited rainfall events. We got in a little bit early, mid-May, so before Palmer amaranth started to emerge. And with limited rainfall came limited germination events of Palmer amaranth. So Palmer is a weed that comes from the desert. It can thrive in very dry conditions, but you still need rainfall to get it to germinate. And we had about 4 to 6 rainfall events this year in 2021. So limited population to work with that year. 2022, kind of a opposite story. Plenty of rainfall, certainly early on. So much we weren't able to get in there until early June. And basically a couple times a week we got a rainfall event, which meant an additional Palmer amaranth flush. So basically we had the trials in 2022 on a more consistent pressure from Palmer amaranth. So 2021, I'm not getting into the details. This will be recorded, or people certainly can screenshot as they wish. Several aggressive corn programs. Even in the county where we applied these, this is going to be more money than most people want to spend. But I want to kind of throw some very aggressive programs at Palmer. So again, 2021, planting before Palmer emergence, pre-emergence, and then 28 days later, we applied a post-emergence herbicide. Very good control when the post-emergence went on. So between the limited germination events and the fact that we planted early, most of these were near complete control. 2022, when we were planting about the same time as Palmer emergence, still some very good programs in here. Some of them started to slip, so now we're only getting about 85% control out of that pre-emergence herbicide. But keep in mind, 86% was the lowest here when we have a pre-emergence program. Early post, which is more reflective of what a lot of folks will do with corn in our geography. Basically wait until about 2 leaf to 2 collar growth stage to start applying herbicides. That 2021 season, again, we were getting this on right when the Palmer was probably 14 days after planting, right when Palmer was just about emerging in 2021. So very good control in that year. 2022, what happened? Well, we planted the same time as emergence. So we came back basically 2 weeks after emergence had begun, And now we're basically from 35% to almost 90%, depending on the program. And what were we seeing? Basically, these were taken about 2 weeks after application, and I could not find a single Palmer plant taller than a ½ inch when we made an application. Some of these, I know this plant here, there's 4 different sites of action applied to that plant. This is about the same, but basically 2 weeks later, we're finding from ½ inch to some very tall plants that are surviving with some symptomology. So, talking with colleagues that have worked a lot more with Palmer and some of this metabolic resistant Palmer, this is a plant that if you have a cropping system, we want to control it before it's out of the ground. And we certainly saw that in the 2022 year. 2021, we did get very good results, but that may have been more of an alignment of application timing compared to Palmer emergence. So soybean, I'm just going to show one quick trial. And again, for the most part, for today's purposes, the products and the rates don't matter. Just let it be known that this is several of the effective pigweed herbicides at the maximum labeled rate for the soil type at this operation. And I point that out because some of us are probably using Spartan in some of our fields. No one's using 12 fluid ounces, but this is the maximum labeled rate in soybean on this operation. 4 weeks after planting, a wide range depending on the product used. I just generally we'll kind of lump this as we get more consistently above 85% control on the right side of the screen, where we're having 2 to 3 effective active ingredients, where we have 1 effective active ingredient, anywhere from 47 to 89% control. So for those paying attention to stats, for me, everything that's an A is the same. So in this case, the only A that's a single effective active ingredient is Spartan at that very high rate. So again, we don't have group 14 resistance, but this is the rate that no one's going to use that it took to get even 89%, 90% control after 4 weeks. So some good foundational programs were out there, but we had to come through timely with post-emergence applications to clean them up. So I thought I'd kind of wind things down to show some yield loss of what we're seeing in corn and soybean. So Quincy Law was here for a few years as a noxious weed scientist, and was working with me on several things with Palmer amaranth. So these are kind of his slides and his trials, but I was certainly very involved in them. So what we wanted to actually do is recognizing that we would love to plant about May 1st. And water hemp and Palmer, particularly Palmer in this case, will emerge about June 1st. And so we want to see if Palmer amaranth comes up 4 weeks after planting, what kind of yield loss can we see? So yes, we started Palmer amaranth in the greenhouse, and we transplanted a lot of Palmer amaranth into these fields. It's a very labor-intensive trial, and we hand-weeded all the other weeds out of these trials too. So a good picture I wanted to show. So we went as high as 8 plants per meter row. So think of it per yard. So basically within a 3-foot length of soybean row, we had up to 8 plants, was our highest density. Most of the data we have are where we transplanted 4 weeks after planting. The second year of the trial, our corn and soybean councils wanted us to look at how competitive is it if it emerges at the same time. Here's half the highest rate, transplanted basically the 3 days after planting. So if we had, and I should say these were all transplanted at basically 1 leaf Palmer amaranth. So basically if we had Palmer emerge the same time as soybean planting, here's half the number of plants compared to this plot right next to it, but emerging the same time as soybean versus 4 weeks after soybean emergence. So you can kind of see how competitive this plant can be against a corn or a soybean crop. So yield loss. So we started at half a plant per meter squared and went up to 8. This is just showing the transplanting 4 weeks after planting. But basically we saw as high as just about 50% yield loss in soybean. And again, I like to beat a horse until it's extra dead. But this is emerging 4 weeks after planting. So even though we got basically 4 weeks of good soybean growth, we can still lose in high infestations up to 50%. What might be more realistic in some fields, maybe in this area, and that's still about 20% yield loss for these plants that emerged 4 weeks, 1 month after we had planted. What did this look like come harvest? A mess. So there's just a picture of what some of these plots look like. Corn, very different story. So again, the same timing of 4 weeks after planting, transplanting these palmer in there. No real curve, no real trend. Everything seemed to be somewhere around 5% yield loss. What did the plants look like? This is probably about knee high. So we still had plenty of palmer that survived, went on to produce seed. Don't have the seed quantification because we did collect all those and make some poor undergrad count all the seed, but plenty that went in there and produced seed. So yield loss on that corn for that growing season, 5%, but plenty of seed still being produced to take advantage of next year's probably soybean crop. So here's just a side-by-side. Corn and soybean planted the same day, palmer amaranth transplanted 1 day apart, showing what, in this case, an established corn crop can do compared to a soybean crop for competition. Did just want to show the last year of this trial, we had included the transplanting about 3 days after corn planting, and we did see a 20% yield loss in that case. So about 5% is what we were seeing. In this case, maybe none in 2022 with some of these compared to our check. But when we had those plants emerge the same time as corn, we were seeing that yield loss. So corn can certainly be competitive against those later emerging palmer. But if it emerges the same time as corn, then we can still see that same kind of yield loss. So a few kind of concluding thoughts of other things that I think are interesting that we saw in this field over the years of research. Mentioned this earlier about Memorial Day. Our other pigweeds, red roots and smooth pigweed, that may be about the first part of May. So palmer is going to be the last pigweed that we have that starts to emerge. But anywhere we had bare ground, we would get emergence through September that would go to seed. So we'll certainly see this in crop fields. I mentioned that we don't really see this in pasture or rangeland, but if you've got some of these bare areas of a pasture or rangeland, could certainly, if the seed is there, it will germinate and try to produce seed. When we basically did nothing, so we always have non-treated controls where we don't apply herbicides in our trials. If we did nothing, palmer was there, but it did not outcompete all the other weeds we had. Kochia, lamb's quarter, the monoecious pigweeds, red root and smooth. But by the end of the year, palmer was always the tallest plant in that plot. So basically, it would germinate, not be competitive, but always found a way at the end of the year to be the most photogenic tall plant in the field. When we wiped out all the other weeds, that's when we saw palmer look just like you see it in every picture you see from trade magazines from the South. Very bushy plants, abundant leaves, very dense, stems the size of a soda can. So very thick stems. I mean, once the competition got wiped out, that's when these plants were really able to thrive. So I'll bring this middle point back into the fact that if a lot of the areas you're concerned about with noxious weeds are pasture rangeland where there's a lot of other competition out there, you can probably have palmer show up and you may not notice it. So that's certainly not favorable for the detection, but I don't think it'll be too established. But if you're in an area where you wipe out all the competition, palmer's going to do just fine, even at our northern latitudes. Here's just the other thing I'd like to point out, just very interesting to note. So there are sunflower screenings that were a main source of cattle feed. Some other cheap sources of cattle feed were utilized at this site. But in 2021, and I just called the site Palmerville to keep it very, very generic and hide the coordinates, we counted each one of these as 10 columns or 10 weeds in a column. So 46 different weed species within our 15-acre block that we conducted research on. And I can tell you about 8 of these don't belong in eastern North Dakota. Some of these, we had some resistance that was never documented before in East North Dakota. And so Palmer amaranth is certainly the main part of this story, but there is other junk that can come in with some cheap feed sources. And certainly for someone focused on noxious weeds, some of our more important ones were showing up in this field too. So even things like absinthe wormwood showing up in the middle of this field. So all sorts of different stuff was found in this field, but again, the Palmer amaranth is kind of the main part of that story. So that's what I kind of had prepared. Just wanted to, again, kind of walk you through our experiences and really show that case study at the end from a cropping perspective, what a worst case scenario can look like. Don't want you to lose fact of the part that I mentioned earlier, that when we found the 1 to 10 or 1 to 100 plants in the field, early detection, rapid response, we cleaned up a population quite quickly. Worst case, though, was we can have large volume importations with plenty of herbicide resistance coming in. So Josh mentioned this earlier, but I've been part of this podcast, War Against Weeds, for 4 years now. We put out episodes in the fall and the spring, and I do have to highlight the last episode that'll be on your podcast feeds wherever you want to find podcasts throughout the summer. We did have Josh and Amber Birch and the Nio Richards on to talk about the Working Dogs for Conservation and kind of that relationship to focus on the dire woad and other things in Montana. So that was a fun episode for me, since I live in cropland most of my research life, and getting to learn about all the great things that those dogs and that working relationship do. With that, I'm just going to, last slide here, Josh, just some contact info. We have our weed control guide each year, mainly geared towards crops, but we do have a noxious weed section for those who are interested. QR code I think will work. If not, search engine of choice. 2025 North Dakota Weed Guide. I'm not as active as I used to be on Twitter, probably by the fact I still have that Twitter rather than the X logo there, but cell phone number and an email address if you have questions. And with that, I will stop sharing and see if we had any questions come through, Josh.
Well, thanks, Joe. There's there's actually so much information on Palmer out there if you really want to get into it, but this was like probably more awesome than any other presentation I've ever watched. So let me first say, if you want credits and you haven't typed in your license number yet, if you want Montana credits, in the chat, type your license number and your name. And then in the Q&A, please ask questions. I don't know if I'll be able to get Joe to ever come on my this twice a year webinar again. So ask now. So Dr. Jane Mangold from Montana State University asked, well, she's got a long one. I don't know if you can see it there, but she says, thank you. But really what she's asking is, please share with us what education and awareness approaches you have been taking in North Dakota. What do you feel is working well, and what do you feel we could be doing better?
Yeah, great question, Jane. So, a lot of our early education was kind of these shock and awe campaigns, basically highlighting how problematic this can be in the South. A lot of education on the cost of a herbicide program, because there are these programs, and I showed some that kind of worked, but that's often all fine and good when you can get high yields, like many in the South can. Well, our yields aren't going to be that high to maybe justify some of the cost of some of these herbicide programs. So yeah, the shock and awe of yield loss, the shock and awe of how expensive a herbicide program can be, and that worked very well, and that certainly led to a lot of healthy fear in people that certainly helped come out and say, I think I've got Palmer. Identification was another huge one. So we have a lot of Powell amaranth, and I'm guessing you guys do too, just across the border. And that's a false negative we get a lot, because some of the things we talk about with Palmer, the seed head can be spiky. Well, Powell can have a pretty spiky seed head. Powell can have a pretty long seed head too. So identification was certainly another big part of this campaign. So those things I think we did very, very well, and evidenced by the fact that we have kept most infestations in check. That also has a negative side with it. I'll go ahead and say that it almost became, for some, you don't want to report it. So I do think there's some populations out there that went unreported because it's almost kind of like a, I don't want to say media circus, but I can't think of a better term for that right now. You don't want it to be known that you're the person with Palmer. And so some cases maybe got a little politically heated with different entities. And so there was some good and bad. I still think it was a net positive, but I'd have to really reflect on if there's there a better way to instill that healthy fear without that black eye that would come associated with having some populations. So that's something that I think in retrospect we could have improved on, but I'd really have to sit down and cogitate on the best way to improve that.
Thank you. I have a whole bunch of questions I should ask, but I'll just limit it to one. Um, if you could tell Montana one thing that we need to do, what would it be? And from your stats, I'm thinking maybe it's leave weeds in the field to compete. That's a joke. You got it.
Oh yeah, yep. That's yeah. Every
The
other weed out
question's
in the
real.
field, then these won't become a problem. No, I think exactly what we're doing by highlighting these two weeds today is keep on the early detection rapid response. I'll go back and this was more focused on Palmer, but again I mentioned at the beginning, water hemp is the main weed for a lot of my farmers. If we had the foresight for early detection and rapid response on water hemp 25 years ago, it could be a completely different game we're talking about for a lot of our farmers. Um, so I think that's the main thing is, these pigweed species, when it's water hemp or Palmer, I don't think it should be a black eye. I think it's great to find them and use the resources that we have. But certainly if a pigweed looks like one you haven't seen before, keeping them out is certainly the best thing to do because they will get in, produce a lot of seed. They're going to come in with herbicide resistance. That's basically guaranteed. And so for the cropping system folks out there, you just don't want them to get established. So I would say, hold the course with the EDRR.
Okay, thank you. That's we had a task force meeting in Sydney a couple of years ago, and Quincy came to it, and Charlemagne and some other people. What's Brian Jinks?
Yep.
He said the same thing. If we, or a lot of people said the same thing. If we would have treated water hemp as seriously as we're treating Palmer amaranth, that's was the big wish. So listen, Montana, if you see either one of these, yeah, we're surrounded now. Idaho's lost control. Washington's and Oregon are starting to get a lot. So yeah, so this is serious. Thank you, Joe, for coming on and taking your time. Thank you, everybody, for attending. I'll have this on YouTube shortly, and please share with your landowners and your colleagues and your friends and your coworkers. And if anybody wants to take this video and post it on your websites or anything, I'm sure we can make that happen. So thank you all. Big thanks to Joe. And yeah, listen to his podcast. And I don't just say that because I was on it. I listened to it for 4 years before I was on it. So yeah, he's awesome. So thanks, everybody. Have a good one.
Yep. Thank you.